Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Star Trek The Motion Picture. Now, Star Trek The Motion Picture came out in 1979, and this is the first movie to be made based off of the TV series Star Trek. Now, the show Star Trek aired in the late 1960s, and unfortunately, at the time the show aired, it wasn't very successful. Like, at the time, the show didn't get very good ratings, and eventually the show was cancelled, but over time the show did develop a cult following through like reruns and stuff, and the show did eventually discover its audience. And what happens is with the cult following that the show was developing, there was even an animated Star Trek series in the early 70s, but Paramount realized that the show was developing a cult following, so they decided to make another Star Trek series, which they were going to call Star Trek Phase 2, but with the success of movies like Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they decided to make a movie out of Star Trek, so they made this movie. Now, the movie is directed by Robert Wise, who also directed one of my favorite horror films, The Haunting. He also directed the original The Day the Earth Stood Still, and he also directed musicals like The Sound of Music and West Side Story. Now, when they were making this movie, they actually went through a couple of different story ideas, and one of the story ideas was actually written by Ray Bradbury. Now, they didn't use Ray Bradbury's story for this movie, but it would have been interesting to see what it would have been like if they used Ray Bradbury's story. But the story for this movie is actually written by Alan Dean Foster, and the screenplay for the movie is written by Harold Livingston, and to my knowledge, I think this is the only screenplay that Harold Livingston has ever written. But Alan Dean Foster, who wrote the original story for this, I believe also wrote a couple of like Star Wars novelizations, and what was I gonna say? And the music for this movie is done by Jerry Goldsmith, and the music in this movie is absolutely phenomenal, and I think this movie was actually nominated for an Academy Award for like Best Music. And these special effects work in this movie are also pretty damn good as well, and I believe the movie was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Special Effects. Now, the plot of the movie is it's set a couple of years after the events of the show. Kirk is no longer the captain of the Enterprise. He's now an admiral, actually, and Spock has completely left Starfleet, and he's, in the beginning of the movie, he's on his home planet of Vulcan, and what happens is the main plot line of the movie is it begins where these Klingon ships fly into this thing, and it's hard to describe what this thing is. Basically, it's kind of like a force almost, but it looks like some giant cloud, and these Klingon ships head into it and literally get vaporized, and Starfleet finds out about this, and they don't know what this thing is. All they know is it's massive, and it's also vaporizing everything in its path, and it's heading for Earth. So what happens is Kirk ends up going on to the Enterprise, and he basically reassumes his role as captain and kicks the current captain of the Enterprise, Captain Deckard, out of the captain's seat. And now what happens is the basic plot line of the movie is now the Enterprise has to go and intercept this thing and try to find out what this thing is and hopefully stop it from heading towards Earth. And that's the basic plot line of the movie, but eventually Spock comes back into the picture. Now, I really enjoyed Star Trek the Motion Picture. I know a lot of people don't like this movie, but this is the movie that definitely kind of launched Star Trek into the mainstream, because before this, Star Trek was just a TV show, and the show at the time, like I said, wasn't very successful, and the show did have a cult following at this point, but it was really this movie which really launched Star Trek into the mainstream and really made it kind of like a big mainstream franchise. Now, the main reason I think a lot of people don't like this movie is the movie does have a very slow pace, but for me personally, I really enjoyed the slow pace. I thought the slow pace worked very well for this movie, and I don't want to give away what this thing actually is. All I'm going to say is this thing is called V'ger, and when you find out what V'ger is, it's actually really interesting and actually very thought-provoking. Now, like I said, I really enjoyed the film, and even, like, not even looking at it as a Star Trek movie, but looking at it as a general science fiction movie, I actually think it's really good as a science fiction movie. Now, also, the character of Captain Deckard in the movie, I actually thought was a pretty interesting character, because he's like, when Kirk comes back onto the Enterprise, he's at the moment, like, the current captain until Kirk kicks him out of the captain's seat, and, and I liked how, like, the whole idea, though, is now the Enterprise has been, like, remodeled and stuff, and Kirk is, like, so convinced that he can handle this, but really, he even admits that he's really kind of out of his league here, when he realizes that the ship has been remodeled, and he really doesn't know exactly what he's doing, so he realizes that maybe it was a mistake to, assume his role as captain and, pretty much just demote, Captain Deckard, and I do like some of the character moments with Kirk and Captain Deckard in the movie. Like I said, I really enjoyed this movie. I mean, me personally, I know there's that whole thing where, it's like the even-numbered Star Trek movies, which are considered to be the great ones, and it's like the odd-numbered ones, which are considered to be the bad ones. Personally, I don't really agree with that, because personally, I enjoyed this movie a lot. I also enjoyed, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock a lot. But like I said, if you don't like the movie, that's fine. I mean, I can understand why some people don't like it. I mean, like I said, the movie does move at a very slow pace, but for me personally, I think the slow pace worked for the movie, and I think it's a pretty good movie. I would definitely recommend it. So, yeah, that's my review on Star Trek, the motion picture, and bye.